Graham Center, and we are so glad to have you all here tonight for our program called Farm to Table, Doomed to be Duped, with Tampa Bay Times food critic Laura Reiley. After the talk, there will be time for Q&A, and we will bring this microphone here to the center, and we'll ask that you come to the microphone because we are audio streaming and recording it, so we'll need that in order to pick it up. Please turn off your cell phones if you haven't already done so, or at least silence them. And then I want to thank the Office of the Provost, the Office of Research, and the College of Journalism for bringing our guest here tonight. And now I'm going to turn the program over to Professor Kim Walsh-Childers from the College of Journalism, who will introduce the program and our guest.
Thank you very much. All right, so this is the latest in our Science Journalist in Residence visitors, and we're very happy to have Laura with us tonight. I was charged with introducing her because our dean was not able to be here, and fortunately for me, Laura had sent a bio, so I can tell you a little bit about her, mostly in her own words because she's a better writer than I am. Laura Reiley is an award-winning food writer, restaurant critic, and author. She has been at the Tampa Bay Times and has been the #1 most read writer for the past 4 years, but says she has lived in fear that a Stanley Cup win or a World Series win would tip things in favor of the sports department. Her Farm to Fable expose in April about the fraudulent claims of locavore restaurants and markets went viral, 860,000 page views and counting, breaking records at the time and totally demoralizing several sports writers. All right, and for an aside, I should add that the Farm to Fable package was also meticulously reported, including fact-checking dozens of menus and interviewing dozens of chefs, farmers, both real and bogus, and food suppliers, in addition to other people. I was really impressed that Laura acknowledges in the package, right off the bat, in fact, that she had helped to promote some of these restaurants that she calls out in the series by writing very positive reviews of their food. I also appreciated that she helps us understand how we can avoid being fed fiction along with our restaurant meals and our locally grown strawberries in the series. So if you have not read Farm to Fable, you definitely should, particularly before you go to another restaurant in the Tampa area. I love this. This is back to Laura. She says she became a food critic not because, as her brother unhelpfully suggested, the job combined her two favorite things, eating and criticism. But she writes about eating because it's among the most democratic of all human activities. We all do it. And over years of meals loved and meals reviled, we become self-appointed experts. Our likes and dislikes cemented, our ideas of good food and good drink honed. So Laura has kept one eye on the plate, but it's inevitable for a food writer that the other eye drifts to the anthropology of food, the folkways of the eaters and drinkers. Sure, you can watch the National Geographic special on Aboriginal yam pounding rituals, but hanging out in your neighborhood Applebee's reveals a lot about a group's values and identity. So in recent years, Laura has approached food writing and reporting as a beat, carving out space to address issues of food ethics and safety, sustainability and food waste, GMOs, the challenges of small farmers, and detangling for readers the rest of our increasingly snarled food systems. The approach has paid dividends. She was a Pulitzer nominee in 2013 and 2015, won an Association of Food Journalists Gold Medal for criticism in 2013 and for Special Project in 2014, is a finalist in 2016, not surprisingly. She won the Florida Society of News Editors' first prize in 2013 and second prize in 2015 for beat reporting, won the National Headliner's first prize in 2015 and second prize in 2016 for beat reporting. And I'm not going to go through the whole list because there are just absolutely dozens and dozens of them. I'm going to stop here, despite the fact there is a lot more for you to learn about this lovely woman, because I think you're much more interested in hearing her speak than me talk about her. But thank you so much, Laura, for being here, and welcome to the University of Florida.
Thank you. All right, let's see if I can fit this here. My clicker. So I thought I'd wait a few more minutes to see if A-Rod is going to show up. You know, I said I'd go to his, he'd come to mine. Our fees are a little different, but it's okay. I would like to start by saying, let me see if I can push this back a little bit. I have a 2 Chardonnay sweet spot, which is where things are much funnier than real life and not yet tinged with any kind of melancholy that like a 3rd Chardonnay would bring. And I was at precisely this spot a few months ago at McDonald's headquarters in Oak Brook, Illinois. I stayed the night before a press conference where we got to sit down with the CEO. I stayed at the corporate hotel, had dinner, walked around the hotel afterwards, and realized that the hotel was decorated entirely with great works of art with McDonald's products inserted in them. So there was Renoir and Degas, and there was Whistler's Mother, you know, all dark gray and, you know, like austere, and a Happy Meal right on her lap. So with that said, it struck me as the most hilarious metaphor that I could think of. That in recent years, for a lot of us, what's at the center of our screen or at the center of our frame or canvas is our food, the provenance of our food. And what McDonald's was trying to do via Renoir or Degas was say, we've always been here, you know? This is us. And indeed, the next day, me and 20 other journalists from around the country sat at the knee of the CEO, and we learned about sustainably wild-caught pollock and Rainforest Alliance certified coffee and cage-free eggs, etc. They told us how the high fructose corn syrup had been taken out of the buns and the preservatives had been taken out of the McNuggets. And we all wrote it down. And it wasn't until I got home a couple days later and was writing up a story that I realized, wait, but the inverse is not true. The nuggets still have the corn syrup, so it's spin. It's the halo effect. Say something nice and wholesome about X number of products in your arsenal, and it casts this warm glow over everything. So McDonald's is going farm to table, and they are not alone. In August, Wendy's bought a full page, it was kind of a multimedia page on the New York Times website called, it was called Fresh Food Fast from Farm to Fork, which is a little hard to say, especially after 2 Chardonnays. That same week, P.F. Chang debuted this Farm to Walk program. And during the opening ceremonies of the Olympics, Subway had a new ad campaign called Clean Slate. And it had this like hilarious voiceover that said, every day we're finding new ways to serve fresh, locally sourced produce and food free of artificial preservatives whenever possible. Subway, okay? So I guess the big question that I've had is, why is this happening? People are interested in the provenance of their food, and they're especially interested in local food. But the reason for that is that we all have different reasons. We come to local food from different places. So, first of all, there's the kind of the Sybarite who is, they care about taste, they care about flavor. They want food that is as fresh as possible. They want the shortest distance from the farm to their plate. Food's more nutritionally dense that way, probably tastes better. There's debate, but it seems to be true. The next group of people is just the fearful. You hear mad cow and E. coli and et cetera, et cetera. And you start thinking of food as a little bit your foe. You know, where's it from? Where's it been? You know, what could it have on it? So I think a lot of people going local means circling the wagons in a way. And then you have environmentalists who say, you know, that are all about carbon footprint of your food, you know, preserving genetic diversity, all those kinds of things. You know, the average food travels 1,500 miles and takes 56 calories of fossil fuel to deliver 1 calorie of food energy. That's average. So you can see that those people, that there's a point there. You know, then there are people who are civic boosters, who want to just put their money back into the local economy. You know, there's this multiplier effect that was like an economist from the 30s, I think, came up with, that something like, I mean, the math is always a little bit different depending on who's doing it, but if you spend $1 in the local economy, it brings $4 back to the local economy. You know, that may or may not be true, but I can understand that as a very serious motivator for some people. And then there are people who are small farm enthusiasts, people who say, hey, you know, small farms bring, you know, ecotourism, they increase habitat, they build community, they keep taxes down, you know, tomatoes don't go to school. So there are those kinds of reasons for coming to local. My problem with all of this is that we're being lied to about it frequently. I was doing a series for the paper last year, largely to get out of the office. Me and a photographer went and did a series called On the Farm, just researching Florida farms and, you know, just kind of a day in the life, and we did maybe 10 different ones. We were at the Dancing Goat Farm in Tampa. This woman, Pam Lunn, raises goats and makes cheese and milk and kefir for the local farmers markets. And we stood and we watched her interns, tons of unpaid interns at a goat farm, because there's lots of baby goats. We watched them collect the milk and put it in the redneck cooler, and, you know, kind of the process. And while we were doing that, she was grousing, and she was saying, you know, this is BS. Like, I sell my stuff honestly at the markets every week, but because it's raw milk and it hasn't been aged 60 days, I have to sell it for pet consumption. You know, it's the law. She's like, it just burns me up, because there are all these people at the farmers markets lying. And I said, whoa, hold up. What are you lying about what? And she said, well, you know, there's a lady in Tampa who sells at a bunch of the markets, and she's got 26 laying hens and sells more than 50 dozen eggs a week. And I said, well, what's wrong with that? You know, and well, chickens make 1 egg a day. You know, do the math. I'm like, oh, okay. And then she said, oh, and there's this guy, Gary Park, does all the markets. You know, super nice guy, but you can tell. And I kind of walked away, and I thought, well, could I tell? Like, what is it about this? Why does she think this guy is fraudulent? So I went, and I met him at 4 different markets, and he told me the same thing at all of these markets, that his family had been in Plant City strawberry farming for multi-generations, and he had peeled off about 10 years ago to do hydroponic farming. And he had 2 acres of hydroponics in Dover. So, you know, as a journalist, sometimes I think you develop you develop spider senses a little bit. And this guy, like, my spider senses were nuts. You know, he just seemed like a shyster to me. So I got in the car and I drove to Dover, and I pulled up at where his Facebook page said his farm was, and sure enough, there were 2 acres of hydroponics leaning, kind of all sun-bleached, you know, huge tufts of grass. And clearly, these things had not been used in at least a couple years, you know, probably more. So I went back to him and I said, Gary, I went to where your farm is, and there's no farm at your farm. And he said, oh, that's my experimental plot. So I said, well, Gary, I'm doing a story on the farmers markets, and I would love to know where it really is. And he said, nah, I don't tell anyone where it is. It's on the same road behind a fence. But, you know, since I moved, I haven't lost so much as a shovel. And I said, well, I'm not out there to steal anyone's shovels, and, you know, I promise I won't reveal the whereabouts if you just tell me. Nope, not going to do it. So I spent a good long time with that same photographer, probably doing some illegal acts and going down every driveway on this long strip in Dover. Never found the farm. Did, you know, kind of Google image, couldn't, you know, never found it. Drove by his house one day, and his truck is parked in the driveway, and in back of the truck is a huge stack of wholesale produce boxes. So if this guy is not a farmer. He's a reseller. And he is selling things, a big sign on his kiosk that says, "I am the farmer who grew these vegetables, pesticide-free." People are picking, getting a package of his strawberries and feeding their toddlers without washing them because, oh, it's pesticide-free. So about 2 months later, I was meeting with another farmer in Avon Park, a guy who raises Hereford pigs. I didn't even know, I thought Hereford was cows. Beautiful pigs, happy pigs. It's interesting with pigs, they travel in posses, the little pigs, and not necessarily with their own litter mates. It's kind of like the Bloods and the Crips, and they travel together, and the mama pigs, at a certain point, maybe it's just fatigue, but they kind of take all comers in terms of milking, So it's great. It was great to watch. But with this farmer, Jim Wood, he was grousing too. He said, I can't make a living doing this. They're too, in terms of commodity farming, there are too many economies of scale. It's just really hard to do it this way. Plus, there are all the restaurants that are lying. And I said, what? What do you mean the restaurants are lying? And he said, well, people buy from me 3 or 4 times and stop buying and go back to buying commodity pork, which is a third the price, misery meat, and keep my name on their chalkboards and on their. Oh, let me show you Gary Park's farm. So this is his strawberries. Ooh. And this is what his actual farm looked like. And this is Jim Wood. So after these things occurred, I went back to the paper and I said I want to do an investigation. And my paper has a long and illustrious history of doing kind of deep dive investigations. They have a pretty big and imposing investigative team, of which I am not one. And big data team at this point. So it's a big machine. And I said, I want to do an investigation, just me, just driving around in my car, talking to farmers, talking to distributors, and then seeing what I find out. So I got permission. So I took February and March off to do research. I wrote for 2 weeks in April, and on April 13th, this series went live. We'd never done a series where the whole thing went live on one day on the web. And it immediately, I knew that I'd touched a nerve, and it wasn't just locally. I mean, this was a very hyper-local story about Tampa Bay markets and Tampa Bay restaurants. And within 24 hours, I had 500 voicemails and emails, largely from other places in the country, from Canada, from Australia, from Alaska. I mean, really, like places where you think, how did you find it? How did you read it so fast? Because it was kind of a long read. And how does it resonate with you? And I think what pretty much everyone said was, this has been going on for years, and we've never known how to bring this to people's attention. So I guess my next question is, how did we get here? Like what was the system before we had this? And I will say, in the aftermath of World War II, we fell in love with convenience foods. It was, can of cream and mushroom soup, Velveeta cheese. No one was asking where their food came from. It came from the supermarket, and we were happy to get it from there, And that went on for decades. Until the 1980s, when more of us started going out to eat. In the olden days, like for students here, this is way before your time, but in the olden days, like your mom and dad got dressed up once in a while and got a babysitter and they went out to dinner, and that was that. That was going out to a restaurant. In the 80s, we started having those like, there's nothing in the fridge and it's Tuesday, going out to eat. So Americans' use of restaurants climbed dramatically in the 1980s. But it really was in the 1990s when the rise of food TV changed things significantly in 2 ways. First of all, we had never thought about who was in the kitchen. We didn't care about who was in the kitchen. If you had a favorite restaurant in the 1970s or 80s or earlier, whatever, you maybe knew the restaurant owner. You didn't know who's in the kitchen. He was just some schlub with an apron, So it was really the rise of food TV that caused us to think about chefs as authors and chefs as people with a take and a vision and a signature style. It just elevated the role of the chef. The second thing it did was it taught us something that chefs have known forever, is that ingredients matter. For the first time, we realized, oh, like there's a difference between, this acorn squash and this one. So it was kind of an epiphany for a lot of home cooks that the provenance of your food maybe made a difference in the outcome. Right around the same time in the 1990s, farmers markets started popping up, kind of bicoastally, a little bit in the northern Midwest. And this really changed things in another way. And I like to, Loretta Keller is a chef in San Francisco, and she cracks me up because she kind of says this was like the beginning of the end in some ways. That for the first time, chefs were competing with home cooks. It was an arms escalation. So we could get decent stuff at the farmers market. They could get better stuff. And that's when you started to see farm names and connections, whether it was at Chez Panisse or wherever in the country, John Ash or Rick Bayless or whatever. You started seeing the connection between the chef or chef owner of a restaurant and local or regional farms. So by about 2007, you really started to see the term farm to fable, or farm to table, farm to fork. The whole idea of the locavore. And my question has been, with those terms, if a restaurant uses 300 ingredients, which is pretty average for a restaurant, how many of those have to be local for that claim to be, a reasonable claim? I just want to pause there and talk for a little bit about why it matters. I was saying to a class today, it's not Zika babies, it's not tainted water. This is, if you order a pasture-raised, non-GMO, local heritage breed chicken breast, and you get a Tyson factory-farmed, Frankenboob, like it is still a chicken breast. You ordered a chicken breast, you got a chicken breast. What's the big deal? I would say that it's fraud like any other kind of fraud. That food is a very unique part of commerce because it is so trust-based. It's more trust-based than any other thing that we buy. If you think of anything that you purchase routinely, food is the only thing where they bring you something, they put it in front of you, and you have no way to track back. So I would say that essentially lies beget lies. And this is kind of in any industry. If you have shysters who are misrepresenting, it's a powerful financial incentive for other people to fall in step. What I've heard from numerous people in all different parts of the food system is that this is kind of the doping scandal, not to say anything about A-Rod, but of the food world, basically. So we need to demand accuracy. If we don't, first of all, legitimate farm-to-table restaurants don't stand a chance. People who are trying to do it right. It's not economically feasible. If you are selling grouper sandwiches, the real deal, and they're $16, and a guy down the street is selling grouper sandwiches for $9, people are going to go there. And I mean, this happens all the time. I'll give you an example. I'm working on a story right now about the seafood festivals in the state of Florida, of which there are many. And I went to a couple of them in the past couple weeks, and I went to the John's Pass one, which is a huge one. 100,000 people come. On the front of all the kiosks at this festival, grouper sandwich, $10. You go around the back, and there are boxes of basa, which is fake grouper, basically. So they're barely even covering their butts on this. So it's an enormous problem. So if those restaurants fail, it's also a cataclysm for small farms. Local, sustainable, artisanal food, it is more expensive. It's just, and we have to, if we want those things to continue to exist, we have to recognize that and just acknowledge it and go forward on it. Because of subsidies, crop insurance schemes, exploitation of natural resources, et cetera, big ag already has a big leg up. Small farms are at a huge disadvantage. And what's interesting is in our country, the average farmer is 62 years old now. So we're at a kind of a crisis point. And you see a lot of young people, millennials and Gen Zs, getting into farming. The biggest problem is scaling up, going from that first year into the second year. And this is not making things any better. This is going to kill a lot of small farms because it's really, really difficult to take a tiny farm and to make it a medium-sized farm. It's the hardest thing. I would like to just say that there are a couple other elements to our food system right now that alarm me just as much as what I've said so far. In May, something happened that has barely been reported, and I think it's just because it's hard to really wrap your head around. We, for the first time in American history, we spent more money at food service, so restaurants, quick serve, grab and go, et cetera, more money at restaurants than we did at the grocery store. So let that sink in. So we are outsourcing the making of our food. We are having other people make our food for us more than we are making it for ourselves. So if that doesn't open us up to more people misrepresenting, I don't know what does. We're ceding responsibility. And then you add into the mix things like Uber Eats. I'm sure every college student is, you're at home and you're like, I just need food to arrive like magic. My magic machine here. I'm going to order some food up. So now you have this middleman. So you have the restaurateur, you have the farmer, real or not, the restaurateur doing what he says he's doing or not, and now you have an added layer of obfuscation, and the stuff arrives on your, styrofoam tray. And then you have things like HelloFresh and Blue Apron, which I think in some ways I applaud that there are new ways of getting food to your front door, but it's not making the system any clearer. If you have a box that arrives on your front porch and it's got tiny baggies with 2 garlic cloves and a red bell pepper, and where's that food from? You have no identifiers of what the circumstances were of the growth of those foods. And then, I'm sorry, I'm behind. And then we have this guy. And this is not a political, I am purely going to talk about what he's said about our food system. So this is, yeah? I'm sorry, what? Oh, in May, we've spent more money in this country on food outside of the grocery store than we did. So food service in all the ways, the cafeterias, restaurants, convenience stores, et cetera, not in the grocery store. So this is someone whose favorite meal is KFC, See's Candies, and a Diet Coke. And of fast food, he said, well, at least you know what's in it. And I would counter that by saying absolutely not. Most of us have no idea what's in that. He has already said that he would slash food safety regulations, limit the scope of what he calls the FDA food police, eliminate the EPA. He opposes mandatory labeling of GMO foods. He has said he will break SNAP and WIC out of the Farm Bill to defund them. So that means that 40 million Americans who are food insecure are going to have a more challenging road ahead of them in terms of getting nutritional food into their families, their kids, their whatever. In terms of his transition team, the guy that he has tagged to manage food issues, Michael Torrey, has ties to the soda lobby. Like that, I have concerns that might not get us in the direction that we want to go. So, all of that said, at this point, I think it's fair to say that the federal government is not moving in a direction where there's going to be greater transparency in our food system. I'm not advocating for enormous amounts of regulation, but greater transparency, I think, seems merited. Our state and local governments are also not in a position to work on our behalf. And I'll give you an example in the state of Florida. So we have 40,000 restaurants, and there are 191 inspectors in the Department of Business and Professional Development. Those people spend the lion's share of their time keeping us safe in very basic ways. And these people they do a great job at what they do. They're valuable. I'm not denigrating the job that they do. But they're going to a restaurant and they're looking in the walk-in and they're making sure that the temperature inside the walk-in is appropriate, that there's soap at the hand washing sink, that the cutting boards are cleaned appropriately. Those are all important things to keep us safe. What they are not doing is comparing the invoices to what's on the menu. So they are not looking to see that if you have grouper on the menu, that it's grouper in the walk-in. And I'll tell you, I mean, there are egregious lies. I mean, some that, I found one place, and actually the state of Florida found this place and didn't find them, that was serving pork as veal, because pork is a lot cheaper than veal. And so for people who don't eat pork, it's a pretty galling substitution. And the idea that the state wouldn't find them says something about the values of the inspectors. I think even if we take it more micro, the farmers markets, I've talked to a bunch of farmers market managers, and they've said, putting on a farmers market is like putting on a party. And having resellers is practically like having a bounce house. Like you're just trying to have a good time. You're trying to get people with their dog strollers and, the guy playing the guitar, etc. The resellers are there to serve people who want to use the farmers markets as a grocery store, who want a one-stop shop. But the problem with that is that Americans are conditioned to want plenitude. We want everything all the time. We want 4 different kinds. We don't want just Bartlett pears. We want 3 or 4 kinds of pears. We want, at the farmers markets in Florida where no apples grow, we want 4 kinds of apples. So the legitimate farmer who's selling legitimate stuff, turnip greens, some radishes, some, whatever he's got, it's really hard to compete with, the bounce house right next door. So I would say that even on the micro level, our farmers markets around the state, especially in Florida, I would say, especially when compared to a state like California or New York State where there are tighter regulations on farmers markets, our farmers market managers have really punted. They don't have the wherewithal, they don't have the resources to vet appropriately. And I mean, I would say, to me, the onus is on them to make sure that people are doing what they say they're doing, but they don't. So the big question is, what can we do? Like I hate that, like sometimes I feel like such a downer with all of this, I'm sorry, you're gonna walk out of here, I'm gonna eat a cheeseburger because there's no point. There are things we can do. I think the very first thing that most of us don't do, because most of us are not connected to agriculture. Most of us have not farmed, don't have a connection to the earth and the cycles of life, and you need to know what grows near you when. It's a very easy thing. Actually, IFAS has an app from UF, and it will tell you, mostly it's geared towards what to plant, but it also will tell you what is in season right now. So that's something that we all need to do. But at the same time, if you're committed to eating locally, you have to be content with eating a more limited repertoire, especially in the summer in Florida. There are restaurants that are trying to do this. And yeah, you're going to get tired of okra. You're going to get tired of eggplant and peppers in the summer because that's about all you're going to get. But I think that that's part of how the whole world has all historically eaten. So, it's not anything new. It's not austerity. It's thinking about your food a little bit differently. I think that a lot of the problems that we've seen, or a lot of the problems I've described, are definitional. That we need better definitions for what some of this stuff means. In terms of local, if you see local, it's a very reasonable thing to ask, what do you mean by that? I'll give you some examples. So Whole Foods, which you think, that they're kind of progressive and at the vanguard of some of this stuff, they say, basically, well, we leave it up to the stores. Oh, okay. So let's see, Publix defines it as a product that comes from any of the 6 states in which they operate. So you could be in South Florida eating a Georgia peach, and that tag on the produce, in the produce department could say local. I find that very unhelpful. Safeway has described it as food within an 8-hour drive. The 2008 Farm Bill defined it as food marketed less than 400 miles from where it was grown. And then the Ag Act of 2014 didn't mention it at all, because clearly it was a contentious point. But that right there seems like punting to me. So the next thing we all need to do, is familiarize yourself with labels. What do things mean? I'll give you some ideas. They're naturally raised beef. It's a really cryptic term. A better term is never ever 3, and that means that beef has never ever had antibiotics, beginning whole life cycle, not prophylactically, not just hasn't. Organic beef means beef that never ever 3 beef that also has access to pasture. So there are all these. If you go now and you look at eggs, there's so many different kinds out there. Recognize that cage-free is not the same as pasture-raised. There's some horrifying videos right now online about, I don't suggest any of you watch these videos, about large-scale factory farming of cage-free chickens. It's not a pretty thing. So sorry. So that's an important thing. It doesn't take that long, really, to just invest a little bit of time in reading about what some of these things mean. This is you reading labels in the grocery store, but also menu terms. To me, it's just part of being educated about food. And then there's social media. I think is something that we're all in restaurants now, and we're Instagram bragging about our entree. So take 2 minutes at the beginning of a meal. And if a menu says, we have Farmer Brown's heirloom tomatoes, where is Farmer Brown? Is he a local farm? Does he have tomatoes right now? And does he say that he serves, or that he's selling stuff to this restaurant? I mean, if I were king, I would say every small farmer owes it to himself and his end users to have a website that's kept up, or a Facebook page, which is free and easy, that's just, here's what I have right now, and here's who I'm selling to. I think in a system like this, transparency benefits everyone except the shysters. That is just there's no truer thing about our food system. So use social media for good, Twitter, whatever, Facebook, and then it's not just punitive. I mean, it's not just go on Yelp and lambast the people that you think are fraudulent, but it's also the people who are doing things right. Patronize them, talk them up, promote them, because it's hard and expensive to do things right. I think that being vigilant about things that can go wrong is important as well. Don't eat oysters if you have any, immune system, compromise. I mean, there are things that you need to do to stay healthy. Read the newspaper in terms of foodborne illness outbreaks. And then there are really good resources, whether it's at the CDC or, there are a bunch of kind of websites that really involve themselves in food system transparency. And I would say that's not a hard thing to do. And a lot of the stuff it's fun reads. And then get involved. I mean, farmers, in my experience, unless they're having a really lousy day, farmers are very happy to tell you about what they're doing and to show you what they're doing. And that goes double for restaurateurs and chefs who are doing things the right way. They want to come out and talk about that stuff. That's why they do it, is to share and to enthuse about the stuff that they get in the kitchen. So I would say that, in conclusion, that our food system is really an investment in tomorrow, and that it's an investment against food insecurity, against an uncertain energy future, which I think we're right at the cusp of, that we have a lot of questions about what will happen. Local food is a hedge in some ways. 7 billion people on the planet, 9.5 billion projected by 2050. So what we are projecting our food system to look like is a pretty important piece of our pie. And in order to project anything accurately, you need to have a reasonable idea of how it all works now and how it isn't working. So thanks, sir, for having me, and I'd love to take any questions.
Don't be shy. Come on, just walk right up. Just speak right into the microphone.
I think like a lot of people do want to buy local, like what you were saying. So why do you think that they're so willing to like trust the labels and support a system that's so broken?
I think some of it is that we're lazy. There is. I talked to a class today, and one student said something really interesting about how it's kind of like this hipster co-opting. We all increasingly express our values and ideals through what we buy. And I used as an example today the idea of you want to impress your friends, so you go to Canal Street in New York and you buy a fake Prada bag. And that if you do that, you really need to reevaluate your values. That you cannot, you're doing a disservice to your friends, to yourself, to Prada, and to the child laborers who are sweating away somewhere making that fake bag. And I think the food system is a little bit like that. We like to be in the aura, the warm glow of ethical choices, but the commitment to pay for it is sometimes daunting. I think we've always had this sense of entitlement to cheap food. I mean, our food is, relative to any other developed country, we spend less of our disposable income on food. And there are a lot of options. I think more so, if you think about all the places now you can get food, and I think that students feel that pressure more than anyone, because you're very pressed for time. You probably don't have kitchens equipped with enormous numbers of, ingredients and pieces of wonderful, equipment. So that it's very tempting to eat crappy pizza and grab stuff where the ingredients are subpar at best. So some of it is also that we crave fat and salt and sugar. We're a slave to that stuff, and that's what the fast food and grab and go stuff, that's what they do best. And we cave in, but there's always tomorrow. There's always a new day. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Thank you.
What's the worst thing? Fish?
Fish is definitely the worst thing, because it's the easiest to, first of all, most of us don't know by looking at a fillet of fish what species it is. So I would say buy your fish whole. That's what I recommend to restaurateurs as well. Buy your fish whole, because it's much easier to tell freshness, what kind it is. Fish is really fraudulent because it's a product that comes from all over the planet, and there are no barcodes, and there's tracking back is difficult. But there's more tracking back than there ever has been, and I think it's moving in that direction. And with fish, it's especially complicated because there are the issues of sustainability. The fisheries, and is it a healthy fishery, and should I be eating that because were there slave laborers who were cleaning these shrimp, and then there are the issues of where on the food chain the fish is and how much mercury or other kind of contaminants that fish might have. So there are a lot of considerations with fish. So I would say, first, using systems like the Monterey Bay Aquarium Seafood Watch, that it's not, it can make you tear your hair out a little bit, but it's at least a kind of a clearer vision of what's good, better, best, and what you should avoid.
Did you do any dumpster diving as part of your investigation?
I did, but I was told by the lawyers at the paper that it was a very bad move on my part. What's really funny, though, is at one restaurant, I had to go back to dumpster dive because I had a specific thing in mind that I wanted to get. And when I got there, I was all in my lady clothes from work, and I had a step stool from my kitchen so that I could get in there. And it was still, the dumpster had been mostly cleaned out, so there were just like a couple things at the bottom. And there was a guy waiting to get into the restaurant. It was like 8:30 in the morning. And I said to him, well, I need a box that's at the bottom of the dumpster. Could you help me? So I got this guy. I didn't lie as a journalist. I didn't misrepresent what I was doing. I said there was a box I needed at the bottom of the dumpster, and darned if he didn't help me, Nice young guy, helped the lady out with her step stool. But yeah, that was definitely a component of what I had to do, because the distributor side of things, if you buy your food through Sysco or US Foods, it's a totally, sealed box. Like, they will not reveal anything because they know where their bread is buttered. It's in their best interest to be as opaque as they can about their customers. Sure.
Two questions. Number one, how did you persuade your editors to let you do an investigation? You're a food writer, after all. And secondly, where did you get the nerve to confront these restaurant owners and actually call them liars, which you did in your stories?
So the first question, it wasn't super easy, although I think I'm a pretty prolific writer for the paper, so maybe I had enough tantrums about it that they finally caved in. I mean, it wasn't, and I think also I was not asking for a data team or, deep resources. They paid for some DNA testing, and obviously they had me off of my regular beat for a couple months. But I had to bring them enough evidence that there was likely to be a story there. So I had a meeting with the muckety mucks and said, I found this, this, and this so far. So they agreed for me to, if I hadn't come up with anything, I think it would have been a harder sell. And in terms of confrontations, I mostly, as a journalist, talk to people who want to talk to me. I want to do a story on your restaurant, woohoo, So to have to call, and a lot of these people, I would not say any of them are my friends. If you're a critic of any kind, you have to maintain distance. You don't hobnob, you don't, go to their house for dinner, you don't ever take anything for free. So I'm not friends with any of the restaurateurs in the Tampa Bay area, but I'm friendly with a lot of them, and it cleared the deal for a lot of those relationships. So I'm still not clear on how the future is going to look with some of them. And the confrontations were hard. I mean, and I didn't go to journalism school, so I don't have a background in how to formulate a conversation going from the easiest stuff to the hardest stuff. And I probably did it wrong a few times, but I got in the swing of it. I mean, you put people at ease and you ask them things that you already know the answer to. You ask them things that they're happy to tell you. And then, they're deeper and deeper in the water. And at some point they realize, oh, this is not going well. And I had to say to a few that called them back a second time. I mean, it was kind of a back and forth. And a few times I had to say, you said this and you lied to me. Why'd you lie to me? And most of them just were kind of mea culpa. Most of them said, well, we used to get that, and we stopped getting that, and we just hadn't had time to, yeah. Well, it'll come off the menu. I mean, that was something I heard from all of them. Oh, it's time to change the menu. So, they changed the menu.
Hello. When did this problem hit you, and when did you, first look into local food movement, and how did you feel when you realized people were lying to customers?
I'll start with the end. I felt horrible because a lot of these restaurants were places that I'd reviewed really favorably, so I felt like I had done my readership a terrible disservice. And increasingly, I feel like a food writer's job is to track back if you get a gut feeling that someone's lying about something. I mean, I've looked the other way for years. I mean, I'm lied to. I've been lied to since 1991 when I started writing about food, and it's understandable. A lot of times as waiters, they don't know. You say, are these house-made desserts? Oh, yeah. And you know it's Cisco. You've had the same chocolate cake 10 times, you know? So it's kind of built into the system. People tell you the story that you want to hear. You know, you're at the dinner table. You're there to be entertained. You know, oh, tell me about the whatever, you know. So I've always had an idea that restaurants had a powerful incentive to misrepresent. But it wasn't until maybe 3 or 4 years ago where the level of hyperbole on menus got so out of control that I started thinking someone should do something. And I actually, before I started this project, I called kind of my counterpart at a bunch of papers around the country, and I said, have you ever done this? And if you did, how did you do it? And most of them said, we've meant to do it, we've thought about doing it, it would be expensive, we would open ourselves to litigation. They had a lot of really reasonable rationales for why they didn't do it. I mean, also it's just really hard to get people to tell you stuff. You know, it's almost like you need to get a first critical mass of a couple people to spill the beans, and then other people join up. So, you know, it was, I would say I've been kind of thinking for the past couple of years of doing something on food misrepresentation, but it wasn't really until I started talking to the farmers, and they had very concrete, I mean, they gave me real concrete evidence of this restaurant is saying this and I have not sold to them for a year. So.
And I have one more question.
Sure.
Do you think your expose left like turned people against the local food movement in any way? Because, I mean, if people think they're being lied to, then they might just like give up on local food.
Yeah, I worry about that. And I have, I'll give you a couple examples. So I was doing a review of a restaurant in Tampa a couple months ago, farm-to-table restaurant, and I said on the phone with the chef, I said those words, and he said, "Oh, we don't call ourselves that." So I said, "Well, what do you call yourself?" He's like, "Well, we just say we use the best ingredients we can, and local as often as is reasonable," or something like that. I was like, "Well, that's a whole lot of words, you know, if farm to table is this kind of tidy definition." He was just having none of it. And definitely, I've had conversations with people like Tom Colicchio or Mario Batali, and those two people in particular really liked the series and thought it was important work to get that conversation going. I mean, I heard from Mark Bittman and Michael Pollan and those kinds of people, and they all were like, "Rah rah, this has been a problem for a while." But I also heard from chefs saying, "How dare you? How dare you make people question my authenticity and my what I'm doing?" And so I definitely think there are some chefs, certainly locally and nationally, that think that this could have overall a deleterious effect on kind of the future of the local food movement.
So, do you think that genetically modified foods are going to have to play a large role in sustaining 10 billion people in the next 50 years, or is there another option that favors honest, natural, and locally grown foods?
To be totally honest, I mean, I think that a lot of people have a knee-jerk fear reaction to genetically modified foods, and if they knew how many foods we eat routinely that have, let's say Hawaiian papayas, there wouldn't be Hawaiian papayas if there weren't genetically modified foods. It's complicated because of the specter of Monsanto as like the Death Star. They've done some good things and they've done some bad things. I think that if we're really honest, it would be really hard to feed 9 billion people. I mean, some of the farmers that I've talked to, they've said, we couldn't feed the world the way I'm raising these pigs. But that doesn't mean that factory farming can't get a whole lot better and have a major overhaul in terms of living conditions for animals. And certainly the kind of slash and burn monocroppy, there's some farming strategies that I think we can and should re-examine. In terms of GMOs, I think that, to me, the easiest way to move forward is to have mandatory labeling. Not state by state, because what a nightmare that would be if it was state by state. So a product that doesn't need labeling in North Carolina they sell to South Carolina, and now they need a whole different package. So as soon as you put contains GMOs or whatever, there's a segment of the population that's going to be like, whoa, no way, you know. And I think that's okay. I think that transparency is better. I think that for me personally, I actually went. I got last year I got a National Press Foundation scholarship or a fellowship to go. It was like a farm. It wasn't really farm to table, but it was kind of a American farming kind of seminar for a bunch of days. And we went to Monsanto headquarters and met with, you know, the COO and the CFO. And I kind of went in thinking these guys are awful. And by the end of the trip, I thought, well, it's all on a continuum. I mean, we've been modifying foods for a long time in different ways. I don't like Roundup. You know, I think Roundup's a terrible, terrible idea. And, you know, I'm very worried about butterflies and bees. And, you know, so I think that we need to separate some of these. We need to be a little calmer about the idea of genetic modification. So we'll see what the next 4 years brings. But my guess is that there'll be GMOs will be more in our lives.
I'm wondering what percentage of farmers markets overall, and maybe this is hard to say, are there the shysters? And also in terms of the farm to table movement, do you see it evolving in terms of, you know, what are sort of those next phases of evolution in the future, and how do you see that sort of playing out?
So in terms of the farmers markets, it's totally geographically specific. There are whole states where they do not allow resellers. You know, if you go to the farmers market in Santa Barbara, California, there's just no way. There's no room for resellers. There are enough legitimate farmers, but you know, you have to have a critical mass of small farms. You know, I don't know how it is here in Gainesville, but Tampa's kind of interesting because we have a lot of farms way to the north of us and a lot of farms way to the south of us. So for a small farmer to pack up his truck, first of all, this is someone who already works 6 days a week. So on a Sunday, for him to pack up his truck, drive 40 miles to stand out in the sun for 8 hours and maybe make $600, it's tough. So there are states like Florida where there's a lot more resellers fill in. I think that probably, I think there's a lot of movement, especially people who do slow food or those kind of people who are vigilant about this stuff and are going to exert pressure on market managers to at least label when they're resellers. I mean, like in the state of Florida, you have to have a country of origin label on produce in the grocery store, but you can peel it off and at the farmer's market. It's not illegal. Like that, it doesn't make no sense to me. In terms of the second part of your question, I think that what we're going to see is the restaurateurs who are really serious about it are going to, you know, I was talking to Rick Bayless and he said, I don't work with 30 farms. I work with 4 farms and I have a program where I give them microloans so that they can grow, so that they can go from a small farm to a medium farm and so that they can grow specifically what I want. So I think you're going to see a lot more of those kind of tight collaborations where farmer X decides he's selling his whole crop to restaurateur Y. I think that that's an effective way of you know, kind of being mutually beneficial. So I'm hoping that it's not going to, that there won't be some backlash where the farmers' names become less important. You know, we've been hearing for a long time, Mario Batali's been saying that the next culinary rock star will be a farmer, and it hasn't quite happened, but I certainly think there's room for that, and it should be, you know, I mean, that's what really matters. You know, obviously, and especially now that we're done with like molecular gastronomy and all these like crazy, you know, manipulations of food, I hope we're done with all of that. It is a little bit more like the raw ingredients, they shine through, they matter. And so it would be a shame if the farmers didn't get credit for the good work they do.
Yeah, I guess I have 2 questions.
This will be our last question, and please come right to the microphone.
Okay, sorry. Okay, yeah. So I guess you mentioned restaurants that are farm to table, but maybe not completely or not as much as you think. And I guess my question is really,
what is a reasonable goal? I mean, obviously, everything that is used in the food is not going to be something that you can grow here. And you mentioned that people wouldn't be happy with just eating what's in season. So if a place tells you that their food is farm to table, I mean, what, given the price constraints and all these issues, what do you actually expect? I mean, you know what I'm saying?
Sure.
Like, what do you think is a reasonable expectation?
Yeah, I don't have a number of ingredients, but it's more like intent. One of the restaurants that I wrote about, kind of most in this series was this restaurant Boca that has multiple locations, and I still have a disgruntled employee in their kitchen who sends me invoices from time to time, and it's still appalling. This is a restaurant that makes claims about, all in-house made, blah blah, and local sourcing, and they buy pizza dough, they buy Cisco blocks of blue cheese and say it's Winter Park Dairy blue cheese. So, for me, a lot of it is about intent and intent to defraud. I think that even restaurants that I believe, I think it's impossible to be a totally locavore restaurant. There's a woman in Orlando who's gearing up to do one, and I'm like, knock yourself out, sister. I don't know how it's possible. Who's going to be paying those prices? Because obviously you can't have olive oil, you can't have, where are you getting your salt from? I mean, there's some very fundamentals that you just, you have to, they're building blocks. We don't have a ton of wheat in Florida. I mean, there's some, but we don't have a ton of wheat. I think that to me, it's not so much number of ingredients, but the things that you could get locally. If you're not doing that, then you shouldn't be calling yourself farm to table. And certainly, if you want to have a tomato on your hamburger all year round, just be clear about when it's local and when it's not. Because a lot of people like a tomato on their hamburger, and they're going to be sad in the summer months in Florida when that's not feasible. So did you have another question, or was that it?
Go ahead if you
Yeah, so I guess the other totally unrelated question is you mentioned something about how you couldn't go dumpster diving, and I'm just wondering, what is it about the ethics of journalism that doesn't allow you to do certain things in terms of investigation?
It depends on whether a dumpster is on private or public property. And the dumpsters I chose, I guess, were on private property. In the middle of a parking lot, so go figure, but we had to have our lawyers vet it, and, oh God, we're not saying that part, I don't think in my ineptitude I did anything else grossly illegal, but I do think that, some of this stuff you have to kind of make up as you go along, and you really hope you've not transgressed in any major way. All right, well, thank you all.
Thank
Great.
you. This is a fabulous, very informative program, and thank you, audience, for being here, too. Thank you for bringing her.